V2 version of the 4.5 beta has recently come out, and I'm going to be here to talk about them and see, has Chiori changed significantly enough to be worth pulling now? But first, let's start with some information that we didn't have before when I made my first video. First of all, her normal attack scaling. It's not great. What did we even expect? Oh, and you think it's over? It's not over, because her infusion can be overridden by C6 Bennett. Why? We're in 2024 and characters are still getting their infusions overridden? What is this? Like, come on, Hoyo. This also means that Navia Chiori dual carry, a team that I was very excited about, is fucking dead. So, yeah, good job, Hoyo, on making me sad. On a bit of a brighter note, let's talk about Chiori's particle generation, because that got revealed. It's 1 to 2 particles on the initial cast, with 1 to 2 particles per puppet hit, and this is only going to account for the first puppet. This is going to lead to an average of 9 particles. This is a lot of particles, being better than even Furina. So let's talk about Ito here, because it completely solved most of Ito's energy issues. You can be fine on 111 energy recharge, assuming you're not funneling any of the FAF particles from your Zhongli or your Goro. As for Chiori's own requirements, in this same Mono Geo team, 120% will be fine, but in a Navia team, it's going to rise to about 150%. I would say it's worth building for, even in a Navia team. This is because she can burst within Bennett's field. This is possible because Navia's rotation is so goddamn flexible, and her normal attacks really aren't required aside from getting crystallized shards. But in other teams, her ult's not going to be that good, so I would not recommend building energy recharge if you're not building her for either of these two teams. We also got Chiori's AoE. It looks pretty small, but it works when enemies are grouped, so you could say its AoE is pretty similar to Albedo. In Mono Geo, this is pretty decent because Ushi does function as a taunt, which means enemies will be more likely to walk towards you. In a Navia team, it should also be fine, because she is more of a single target focused unit. Therefore, having a good AoE isn't that important. But when you are using the double Geo core in like any other team, it's not going to be as good. Speaking of double Geo, I might have underestimated its strength a bit in my original video, since it looks like a pretty decent way to use the character. The main difficulty with double Geo is finding good places to use it, not its damage. Because if we look at only Chiori and Zhongli, you're still looking at 400 to 500,000 damage per rotation, which is pretty good, I would say. That strength is further exacerbated when you do realize that Zhongli covers your sustain slot, since he is, of course, a shielder, and in a lot of teams, his shield alone is enough to keep your team alive. But the problem is finding teams where you could actually use these two, since Geo isn't really helping with any reactions. So unless you have 2 characters that can carry the reaction on their own, and also they won't completely fuck up the reactions, you're most likely not going to be using double Geo, and rather going to be using something that assists in keeping your elemental uptime correct. So, yeah, every team seems to have better slot-ins than these two. I would say that Chiori still does need some actual buffs, and by that I do not mean the constellations. I say this because for version 2 of the beta, every single change to Chiori's kit has been to the constellations. And don't get me wrong, these constellations were already good. I would say some of the best. But now they made them even better while completely ignoring her gameset C0. A pretty concerning pattern I've been seeing in a lot of Fontaine's units is making issues baked into their C0 kit and then fixing them with C1. For example, with Risley, he can't upkeep his own HP, and if you run him with Furina, you're forced to run a healer, which means you can't consistently use the charge attack. Bam! C1 comes in to solve your problem. Neuvillette is best ran with Furina, which means you're not able to fully stack his Ascension 1. Bam! C1. Furina requires a very good healer to effectively stack Fanfare. Boom! Her C1 gives her just instant 150. And now with Chiori, you're forced to use her with a consort character, which are notoriously not that good, and then bam, with C1 that restriction is gone. but as for the actual changes, I'd say they're good. The C2 and C4 were swapped. C2 now makes it so you have to actually use your ER requirement again, since you need your ultimate to activate it. This can be seen as a nerf, but her new C2 is capable of spawning 5 super puppets rather than the 3 that her old C2 was able to. Speaking of the old C2, her old C2 is now her new C4, so that's just 3 additional super puppets. So it's still good. Like, what more do you want from me? I can't really say that much about this one. And now the C6. Oh god. Her infusion doesn't work with C6 Bennett, so she's kind of starved for supports at C6, which means you're kind of stuck with Mono Geo. And again, I wanted to use the dual carry here, but I can't. God damn it. So, because you are now forced into running Mono Geo with your C6 Chiori, she is kind of on the lower end of C6s. But there is still a bright side to all of this, because the second version of the beta never really has that many big changes. For example, look at the Navia beta. She wasn't changed at all in V2, and then in V3, she got a bunch of major buffs. And then let's look at Farina. Her V2 didn't really have that many significant changes either. It was her V3 that increased the amount of HP drain that she had, which also means the increase of her fanfare generations. And this is an especially big change to the V2 because the Lunar New Year is so close, which means that MiHoYo took the time to make changes to Chiori's kit while they were probably more excited for the holidays. Which means that MiHoYo knows that Chiori has some pretty serious problems. So it's kind of shocking that they actually put the effort into buffing some of her constellations, or just changing her at all. This means that version 3 is quite likely to have some pretty big changes compared to normal. So yeah, I'm optimistic. It doesn't look like MiHoYo is going to do the changes that I want them to, which, let's be honest, that's not really that strange. It's not like they've ever listened to me before, and let's be honest, why should they? I'm just a silly guy on the internet. But even if she doesn't get any more changes, I think she'll be okay, like a B-tier character. It's not really worth pulling. But if you do want to get her weapon as well. Her weapon options are kinda sad. Peace.